retired Immigration Foreign Service like me, who came to Canada in 1975 as a Hungarian refugee. 57, sorry. Yeah. Dyslexia runs like crazy. He served in Paris, Chicago, Cairo, and Budapest, and since 2005 he's been researching the history of Southeast Asian refugees in Canada. He co-authored Running on Empty, Canada and the Indo-Chinese Refugees 1975 and 80, which was published in 2017. Since 2017, he has been a member of the Hearts of Freedom Research Project, and he is co-author of the Hearts of Freedom Stories of Southeast Asia. And I want to say, just in closing, this is not in your script, Peter wrote 60% of the book. He wrote the entire Vietnamese section, which is quite the longest, the introduction, the methodology part, and it's thanks to Peter we actually, for the first time, have an accurate count on the number of people who came to Canada from those three countries. It's over 210,000. So Peter, over to you.
Vâng, xin ông là cựu ngoại viên của ngoại giao và di trú của Canada và đã nghỉ hưu. Ông tới Canada năm 1957 với tư cách là người tị nạn Hungary. Ông từng công tác tại Paris, Chicago, Cairo và Vietnamese. Ông nghỉ hưu và đã nghiên cứu về lịch sử của những người tị nạn Đông Nam Á tại Canada. Ông là đồng tác giả của cuốn sách Running on Empty và là thành viên của nhóm nghiên cứu điểm bán Heart of Freedom. Ông là đồng tác giả của cuốn sách Trái, Tim, Tự Do ngày hôm nay chúng ta sẽ ra mắt. Xin mời. Yes, Peter is your turn.
A few words that I dare to say outside what I've written down that I would say to you. I feel humbled, really humbled, by the fact that all of you have shown up here. This shows that the main purpose of what I tried to do over 30 years, and I have never, I've been in all parts of the world, but I have never been in Southeast Asia, strangely enough. But I can say that the past 13 years of doing research have taught me to become really familiar with your communities, and I dare to say now that I actually have some good friends in the Vietnamese community, and their perseverance, their ability to keep up with the challenges of life in Canada truly humble me. And just having listened to my friend and colleague Stephanie Stobie's story, and I know the story, I've seen it before, seeing her talent makes me realize how often, and it didn't happen in every case, but how often the journey of Southeast Asian refugees, and this applies to all three communities, Vietnamese, Laotian, and Cambodian, how difficult it was, and how, I mean, almost miraculously, they managed to come out winning. I mean, true success stories, which is kind of surprising, and it demonstrates, in my opinion, Canada's strength. Now, I've heard a lot of the refugees, or originally not refugees and Canadians, but the original stories of people who came here as refugees, and it kind of amazes me that you all say, oh, thank you, Canada, thank you, thank you. And I want to say, thank you, Southeast Asian refugees. What you've done is really very obviously, I'm not a Cambodian, but I wanted to make sure that the Cambodian story is represented here as well. When you go to Cambodia today, and people go for tourist trips, you meet the gentlest, nicest people maybe on earth. They sort of, they tell you, oh yes, please, please, everything is nice and gentle. And this is the place that the most violent excesses of communist revolutions, in my opinion, and I come from a communist country that was communist then, most violent excesses of the Cambodian Communist Party, which became the Khmer Rouge, took place. Now, how is this possible? I'll tell you what my opinion is. The way it was possible was because there was a terrible, terrible war that lasted for 20, or more than, slightly more than 20 years, in which the North Vietnamese were attacking with every possible strength the South. They went down the Ho Chi Minh Trail. They arrived from Laos. They went down Laos. They arrived in Cambodia as some of the most important concentrations of the North Vietnamese troops were just on the South Vietnamese border on the Cambodian side. The way the Americans reacted is not by actually putting in a lot of force. No, no, no. They agreed that it was a secret originally to really bomb, carpet bomb the places where they thought the North Vietnamese camps were. And I've seen estimates. Some of them is as high as 1 million. I think that's exaggerated. But hundreds of thousands of poor Cambodian peasants were murdered. They just died in these carpet bombings, which meant that the agricultural areas in the east of Cambodia were just destroyed, which meant that once the communists were there and the cadres could refer to anything, they said, oh yeah, no, we'll free you, we'll free you. Well, the way they freed them is by, in 1975, even before 2 weeks before the fall of Saigon, they marched into Phnom Penh. They totally madly, I mean, what's amazing about the Cambodian experience is how totally irrational it is. They went, they told people, urban people, for no reason whatsoever, you're no longer allowed to be in the urban areas, out you go in the countryside, and masses of people marched out. They weren't fed, families were separated, lots of people were immediately shot. The situation was just mad. Like it was almost as if hell decided to visit Earth. So that continued. It was called the Khmer Rouge. The Khmer Rouge, what's amazing about the story that it was completely mad, made absolutely no sense. People who were average people lost their families, families were divided, they were in the fields trying to do agricultural labor, people who had never done that. That doesn't mean that the peasants, supposedly, who were supposed to be protected, were any better off. They were gathered together in these enormous camps, not camps, sorry, enormous state agricultural cooperatives, thousands of people. They were not used to them, they weren't producing food. There was actually hunger among the peasants, and it's a rich agricultural country, in fact. And so that was one thing. That continued and continued and continued. Meanwhile, and this is very rarely mentioned, but Cambodia actually had a large Vietnamese population, Vietnamese minority, something like 170,000 to 200,000 people. And the Cambodian communists were, again, no reason whatsoever. After all, the Vietnamese communists were supposed to be their brothers. kicked them out, expelled them, and they ended up in communist Vietnam in camps. And very interestingly, when I did the statistics trying to analyze it, I saw that in the orderly departure movement to Canada, there was a number of Cambodians who came from Vietnam. And I thought, how come? Well, yeah, these were the Vietnamese who were kicked over to Cambodia. And then that's also happens. In 1979, these Cambodian madmen decided to challenge communist Vietnam, and they had all these border incidents, and they, one after the other, and the Vietnamese communists, I mean, whatever they were bad at, they were very good at organizing armies. So the Vietnamese army said, enough. They went over the border, they marched into Phnom Penh, which meant that the Khmer Rouge were escaping to the west of Vietnam, Cambodia, into the jungles, and along with them, for the first time really, or some did before, but any numbers, normal Cambodian people were had enough, and were escaping into the jungles and crossing the border into Thailand. Well, the Thais weren't very kind to them. The Thais basically said, oh no, these are all Khmer Rouge, they shouldn't be coming here. Most of them were nothing like Khmer Rouge. And there's an incident, which is possibly the worst incident of genocide. Small genocide, but very horrible genocide in the history of the 20th century. There were all these Cambodian refugees in a camp on a mountain on the Cambodian-Thai border, and they were rounded up by the Thai forces. They were put into trucks, and they were taken to the edge of this mountain. Now you have to picture the top of the mountain is in Thailand, the bottom of the mountain is in Cambodia. And the mountainside was totally mined, I mean just totally mined. And the Thai authorities gave the responsibility to the Thai Communist Party to essentially chase down these Cambodians down this hill. And what happened was that virtually all of them died. I mean, they stepped on mines. Very few managed to make their way to the bottom. And as it happened, some of those few eventually managed to escape again and ended up in Thai camps. And some of them are actually in Canada. And the stories that you see in the Cambodian section of the book, you will see document this. And I think it's a good thing to document, because it exists. If you go and do research on the internet, you see you could do the research, it's there, but it doesn't really appear anywhere else. And this goes, by the way, for the Vietnamese experience as well. In doing my research, I saw that there's all this material in Vietnamese, but it's lost on the internet. The young generation, young people, and I see some young people here who may not be able to read Vietnamese, do not have access to them, and do not have access to the experience of their parents, of their families in Canada, and of the difficulties. Forgive me for emphasizing the difficulties, because I know, and I emphasized that before, and I think Stephanie's story highlights that. But what this particular refugee movement went through, and it's true of, I think, virtually all refugee movements, yes, Canada welcomes refugees, or welcomed. The situation is a bit different, unfortunately. But the difficulties that people have, especially people with cultures and languages who are as different from English as yours are enormous, and it's an amazing proof that Canada's multiculturalism and diversity policies work. That now I look at you, and I look at Toronto, and I look at the monument, Boat People Monument, and I saw the Boat People Monument in Calgary and in Montreal and in Ottawa, and what is a real proof of is that the resilience that this community has, enormous resilience, and that you make a success of your lives. This has to be preserved. This has to be shown to future generations. Thank you.